So today I decided to share a very long-winded issue and bug that I wound up solving. Kind of more as just starting to get into the rhythm and habit um, of pushing content out there, since I'm now going full time on my small little pre-revenue company. And yeah, this is a useful video probably for anybody at a mid-level engineer that wants to know kind of more what developing at a senior level looks like. And honestly, like a lot of the apps I've built as a senior level, maybe you have like a pet project that you work with on the side like this. But I would say even bugs like this often don't happen when you're kind of bootstrapping some greenfield project. It's really only when you're in the throes of some already established or legacy software, or very large system, that you have kind of various integrations that occur and different overlapping functionalities relying on the same thing. And sometimes these things, if they aren't tested very deeply or without kind of a code coverage type of tool, which I'm sure if I had and will eventually prioritize the time, implementing a coverage tool can help you loads in identifying different blocks of code that your test runners do not run. So that would have solved that easily in this context. But nonetheless, I sort of showcase a bug that took hours to solve, and which is why you would spend the upfront time uh, trying to identify as best as possible, so you don't have to debug on this level. But have at it. I will be posting more content soon, and I hope you can learn something from this video. And if you are not a technical audience, this is going to bore the crap out of you. So let me just save you that time, and where you can check out where I will be posting content ongoing for now on the Facebook link I will link to in a second. And as time goes on, I'll probably get a bit more organized about how I'm pushing content out there, how you can stay in touch. So today's bug was particularly tricky to find, and I'll go over what that bug was. All right, so SaaSworks puts out a product called Microhost. I'll update more info about what that product is, where to get it, or to read more about it. But in general, this is a software that helps you manage microservices, but on your local file system. And so today's bug, I think, is noteworthy because you'll encounter this in code bases all the time that have switched hands and no one knows the original author. But in this case, sometimes if you're working on systems complex enough, you're just going to skip over things like this. And even with this particular set of packages has probably more than 80, maybe closer to 130 tests written for it. So this bug somehow managed to escape testing, and especially when you go through digging through a bug. So let me get to what the bug is. The bug here is that there's this object merge function, and it's designed to merge together different config files. So, but it's doing it in kind of a deep way. But then the decision comes to when you're doing a deep merge of objects, what do you want to do when it comes to the arrays? Do you want to simply concatenate? What happens? What do you do with unique values? And so by default, chose to offer two different functions. So there's this merge function, and then there's this, well, maybe further above it. Right here, there's this merge objects button. Sorry, function, not button. And the merge objects will just have the newer version replaced. So much like you have the object.assign syntax, where the latter parameters override the first set of parameters. Same concept. So with this option, though, this is sort of specifically saying we're interested in the array data from both objects. We want to concatenate them, but we also want to make sure the values returned are unique. So I haven't really accounted for, you could run into, let's say, a false positive, so to speak, where the array value was meant to be a duplicate. So sometimes you make some trade-offs about like what use case you want to capture. Otherwise, you wind up crowding the interface. So if you wanted to capture that use case, maybe you'd make it an option um, that you could parse out of the end of this set of parameters, but maybe you make it a different function. In either case, now on to like what this was causing. So with this particular bug, I had incorrectly assumed what the usage of this Lodash unique by function. And so going into Lodash for a second, it's a helper library. It gives you a variety of sets of functions, and some might even say sometimes it's a consideration. It's so large and its file size, you'd have to make a consideration whether or not to include it. But in this case, made that decision to include it. And so what we have here is an instance where this was assumed to be correct when it in fact was not. And what this was probably doing was it was returning a Boolean here and a Boolean here. And so that's not how this function works. And because of that, what was occurring was a use case that looks something like this. So if we go into the code, so microhost has this functionality to where you can remember your microservice directories, and then by remembering or sharing those packages, you can query files from within your shared packages. So it's a very fundamental feature of microhost. So an example of this in action would be if I create a new file here in the root, call this test, and we'll do that, and then we'll say get all files, let's say in the API folder, and we're just gonna make sure we log that. Okay, and so what we can see here is a couple things going on. Basically, so in this is the view package. Notice that it's in a separate, the way we define it is a separate file root. So, and this stuff, by the way, is all under, I'm kind of ongoing with a patent on all of this. So it's a little bit unique, a little controversial to get a patent, but I have a whole separate video on why I chose to do that. But this view package is sitting in a separate microservice directory. And then notice when we run that query, specifically putting in API as the parameter, we're getting back files right here that are sitting in the API directory. So if I added a new file called a.js and we reran this, we would expect to see that a.js file. So that piece of functionality relies on this cache to exist. So if we took out view from this cache and we reran our function, the view would disappear. And conversely, just more, so that's an internal mechanism, but from a point of view of understanding how the software works, we could also go into view, go to package.json, and we could just take out this API entry from the share folders definition. And that likewise would remove it. But if we put that API line back in, we would get the view files again. Okay. So hopefully now I've explained the area in which errors were occurring. So what occurred was, let's see, inside merge, there was just an incorrect interpretation of what this function did. And if we do it here, I think I need to copy that top line is why. There. All right. Let's comment that, paste that. So by running this code, so I'm going to save this so it auto formats, rerun, just loading. Um, needs this too. All right. So the reason that this bug is a bit scary is because so now what it did was because it was returning booleans. Um, I think for the most part, it's like everything was returning just true. So that means only the first value or one value was returned. Really odd bug, um, because you wouldn't really know based on these side effects. You would assume that uh, that uh, like this is being caused surely by some kind of instantiation. So in fact, uh, you'd assume, in other words, this value at some point gets overwritten. This is not the result of some very recursive function call. And so if we go into file system cache, in fact, there is something that kind of resembles installing like a new cache with an empty shared directories value, which is what this reads as. And would have seemed like maybe there is some code that after it sets it here as empty, that it automatically ensures the file system package is always in there. So I had some code like that a while ago, but that was not the case. And so what made it even weirder was that um, so it made this bug hard to detect as well. And the reason I think it didn't cause any major issues with tests is because let's see, let's go back. Nah, we do want that. So if we revert our state here, and then let's say we get to the end of, we have this in the file system, there's this bootstrap function, which is like the main function of this package. So it calls a lot of other stuff. And if, for instance, here we did a log of that same file system cache, ran our test. Now notice as well that it's actually um, correctly listing what we want from a shared perspective. And then notice as well, the cache itself looks fine after bootstrapping. And so this led to me discovering that there was some kind of asynchronous context that this was being called in. And that led me to then, I started to get close to where the bug was. And that led me to kind of audit anywhere in the code that was asynchronous. So and you can imagine by this time, this is taking me hours of time for something that while it's very trivial and abstract and has little to no value to customers or users, it is very important to have solved this bug, you know, uh, very authoritatively. And you can bet that when you spend so many hours solving a bug, you really need to go in and write a test so that that bug never occurs again, or anything that you encountered, basically. And so I'd probably end my remarks there. I think in this case, this bug wound up being called through this obscure other function. So why do async anywhere? Well, so I have this concept of, where is it? There's this concept of bootstrapping a shared cache, which I guess happens in the cache class, doesn't it? So right here, some asynchronously executed code to kind of reduce your startup time of synchronous code is to kind of read in caches that are kind of related to file system queries. It's all about making sure this is fast. And so this piece of code was the culprit, because what it was doing was that um, it was the reason that this bug didn't occur before, and this is the wild part, is that, and this is sometimes the tenacity that you have to have with coding. At some point, I had discovered that sitting underneath this server package was this file system cache. So this merge code that was broken never would have been called unless there was a reason to merge two caches. And whereas the way that I thought I had coded this was that the file system cache would only save in one place, didn't anticipate that I could have introduced this bug, which I did, from a ladder context. And so the reason I hadn't encountered this bug before was because my cache hadn't been corrupted yet. It was only once I found that that I thought that's probably the cause. And then as I dug through the code related to that, it began to make sense. This was getting set in an async context, and that helped me get to the bottom of things. So that's what I'd wrap up today. The moral of the story is that some bugs will take you hours to get into, and it underlines the importance of tests. But sometimes you're not gonna find everything that's wrong, and you just have to have some tenacity and a desire to kind of solve things at that level. So even just going through that bug just gave my stomach a little bit of a pull. It took me hours. It really always sucks when you spend more than an hour on a bug that is very abstract, and in this case, very edge casey. A code coverage tool would have definitely helped in this circumstance, but as it stands, I still spend cycles just introducing things like a linting into my pipeline and JSDoc generation. So whereas coverage is definitely there, it's been more of a battle so far of just balancing between new features and writing the bare minimum in tests. So sometimes it happens when you're authoring your own code base. I sometimes I hate to think that even in a work context, you're getting a lot of pressure to move quickly, and so you kind of cut corners on tests and you don't implement code coverage. But yeah, this was a very particularly tricky bug because it really required a very specific code path to execute until it was discovered. And so in this case, it could have been my own code from a separate package introducing the bug, or it could have been a third-party plugin, or which my software allows for to have introduced it. So whereas the answer is in a technical, ideal way, code coverage, sometimes we just don't have the time. And so we have to rely on our debugging skills, which in this case, to recap, kind of started from it was a misunderstanding of a Lodash API. They have a lot of features. It's not great documentation. As digging into it more, discovered that this wasn't a simple issue of just this file system shared package cache getting overwritten. It was in fact something more nefarious. It was a bad logic error usage of this Lodash API, which definitely under the right circumstances could have could have gone undetected because it required such a specific code path. Could have gone undetected until it made it into some kind of production environment. Could have caused some damage in terms of the amount of hours that it took to solve this, and that commit would have just been buried in the commit history. So there would have been no ability to revert again. I think getting a high coverage metric is important. I don't actually know where I'm sitting at with my 120 tests, and I have to imagine there's decent coverage, but not every if block and different branch within each function. So that stuff's important. But I hope you kind of learned just the as well. Sometimes when you do have to dig in there, just the amount of tenacity that you do have to have for uncovering what these bugs are, and you kind of have to really want to solve for it because the side effects are being created in a part of your system that everything else relies on. Um, so I hope you learned something. Even if it was just experiential, there's not really like bullet point takeaways. This is just a real life example. Um, and as I said, it's always a bummer when you have to spend hours fixing something like this. But the truth is, implementing coverage, code coverage in an automated way, and then let alone following the code coverage, might take an additional, 15 to 20 hours of work, realistically. So these are trade-offs. This doesn't happen very often. These types of bugs are maybe once every month and a half that a code base might expect to encounter something like really gnarly and like a little just strange. Once you get to the bottom of it, it is something that's so simple. It's not like an architectural problem. It's not an organization of code problem. It simply in this case was just a syntax error that somehow just evaded detection. And there are tests. I promise there are tests that look at the merging functionality that this function was responsible for. But it was that specific edge case of array merging that was not tested. So that's how this happened. I will be posting more content in the days, weeks, and time ahead. And for the moment, while I just figure out my video and all of those rhythms, I'm just going to redirect to Facebook in the next little slide here. So if you want to learn more and just follow some of the content I'll be pushing out, which will probably be like a mix of business stuff and tech stuff, just head to that link for now. I'll make it look more official soon. Thanks.